Hi guys, I know we don't do this very often nowadays. I think it's been a couple of months since our last one, but I think we've had enough changes and stuff added into beta now that we can do another one of these. So again, it's me and Zan here to talk about Shadowlands Cat. Say hi, Zan.
Hi.
So I guess we might as well jump into the actual stuff that's changed. So obviously the big one that everyone will have noticed is that Berserk has changed now, which we like because we've been harping on about how bad Berserk is for a while. So they've changed it. They've essentially swapped Berserk and Incarnation. So now Berserk gives you the stealth effect for Shred and Rake that Incarnation used to, and the Incarnation talent will give you the reduced energy costs. They've also made a change to Stealth Shred, where it will now generate an additional combo point always while in stealth. So it'll do 2 if you don't crit, and it'll give you 3 if you do crit, which obviously changes it. So now you'll always 2 finisher as opposed to always 3 finisher like we were before. And you now have a 20% chance per combo point to refund 2 combo points, 2 with a leveling perk at level 58. Um, so that's a pretty cool change. It certainly buffs the power of Berserk and how it works with heroism.
It also just gonna feel a lot better.
Yes.
Um, because like Berserk was bad just not just because it was weak, which it obviously has been for a very long time, but also because it was just super boring. You don't really feel when you had it up, especially if you combine it with heroism, or just, a lot of gear. And yeah, feels bad moment when you kept energy and all
Yeah.
that stuff as well.
Yeah, so now you have the quite interesting gameplay where because you're refunding combo points and because you're generating 3 combo points, then you can go shred, finisher, shred, finisher, shred, finisher, as opposed to shred, 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 finisher,
Yeah.
shred, 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 finisher, which will just Berserk obviously sped up your rotation a bit because you had more energy to play with, but this will speed up energy in terms of how you actually play it. So it's actually much more interesting in my opinion.
Yeah, it's gonna feel a lot better. Like it's gonna feel like you're actually playing the rotation faster now when you do
Yes.
less builders per finisher.
Yeah.
Significantly less as well. Like
Yeah.
you go from three to one basically. Three
Three
to
to
one
one.
or two.
Yeah. Obviously, it will impact Nelf, so Night Elf is going to be a little bit worse because your proportion of stealth rakes, because of course this does also give you stealth rake, so you'll have that during Berserk. You'll have a few less of those from Night Elf, but Night Elf
on the
is
flip on the flip side though, I mean haste is gonna be less bad, I'm pretty sure.
haste is certainly going to be less bad as well. Yeah, because you'll be able to get more abilities in during that Berserk. Obviously, the energy you gain will actually matter from haste now, which is pretty cool. Um, Not that haste has been particularly bad, but any sort of more value that you can give to stats is always positive. Um, I haven't played a whole lot with it in M Plus just yet, but obviously it does have some a kind of questionable parts for AOE and some interesting parts for AOE. So obviously, currently Berserk does affect your AOE damage because energy reduction, you can convert energy into damage quite effectively on AOE, especially with
In
Primal Wrath.
theory anyway, like it in practice it depends a bit because a lot of times when you were
A lot of the
bursting
times you have
you
too much Predator already, so you
yeah,
just
exactly,
yeah,
you were not capped really.
yes, no. But obviously, this new Berserk, Swipe and Thresh don't have stealth effects, so it only affects Shred and Rake. So this new Berserk, the only real value you get in AoE is the combo point refund for
Yep.
using finishers.
What I would say though is that with the target capping of swipe and how pathetically weak that ability is, to be honest, especially without wild flesh ending, it like I'm not sure you would ever not like multi-dot rake anyway, so I feel like it doesn't matter that much.
Yeah,
It might on some target counts make it worth doing like shred into primal wrath spam, which I guess I
yeah,
like I don't know.
um,
I don't know.
yeah. It'll be interesting to see how that works out. But yeah, Shred, Primal Wrath, Shred, Primal Wrath might be interesting. Um,
Mm,
that's one for a spreadsheet, I guess.
yeah.
And yes, on the sort of the lower targets that you're likely to encounter in a new target capped world, being able to tab rake and everything will be pretty nice as well.
Yeah, I
Um,
think tab break is just gonna be a lot more common than it is on live, because swipe is really significantly weaker without
Yes,
wild
yeah,
flesh running. It's hard to.
yeah. Being
It's hard to
target
miss.
capped and like losing the wild flesh rending is really huge for swipe. There's a lot of space to buff swipe, I think. But we'll see where they go with that. Same with thrash. They changed blood talons as well, which while it doesn't directly have an impact on berserk, it will sort of you'll have to consider that in berserk. You won't always be able to shred finisher potentially. So blood talons. I believe the last time we talked about this, it was still the rake, shred, thrash, 3 seconds. Um, it might even have been the original version, but it's now 3 different generators within 5 seconds. There's
Mm.
quite a lot going on with this because of some of the generators we have.
Yeah, I'm gonna be honest and say that I'm not the biggest fan of these changes, this sequence of changes, because I feel like they kind of
I really feel like they
it,
nailed it with the first version, and then it's
the
gotten
the
worse
first
since.
version was a lot better in my opinion, yeah. And I mean, I know some people thought that bite was bad as an enabler in that, maybe, but the so maybe it should have been any finisher, but definitely the issue with it now is that it is either too easy or annoying to proc, and I think I don't really see what like basically, if you do not consider this at all and just play normally, you will proc it a remarkable amount of the time, because you will go 3 different generators within five
Yes,
seconds in
especially
almost
on
every
single
cycle,
target with brutal
certainly within two
slash.
cycles.
Yes.
Yes, yeah. Um, it is very hard to not do that accidentally, which is because you only need to do it once every 2 finishes, right? And on single target outside of Berserk, that is a pretty slow turnaround. Like, I don't know what the average cycle speed is going to be at the start of Shadowlands, but it's probably close to 10 seconds per cycle, which means, it's very you need to proc it once every 20 seconds in that world, right? Or slightly faster than that,
Yeah.
maybe once every 18 seconds, something, which is very easy to do accidentally. Basically, whenever you want to refresh Rake anyway, you might as well use BRS within 5 seconds, which is going to happen most of the time with
Yeah.
current BRS, and you're just going to get.
Yeah, I think based on the initial sims we looked at, which didn't have any initial lines for procking blood talons, I think it was something like 60% effect, which is
Yeah.
a, a, a huge amount for something that you're not even thinking about. So yeah, I agree. That is largely my issues with it as well. Um, I still
It,
think it's probably more interesting than live blood talons,
yeah. At least in the
or at
context
least
of.
equal to live blood
Yeah, it's
talons.
equal. Yeah. I don't think it's significantly worse. Like, I really don't, because I don't. I know a lot of people like attaches a lot of sentimental value to live blood talents, but like with how weak live blood talents is and how abundant, like
How
it
much
used to
energy
be a
you
lot more
have.
fought with. Yeah, exactly. Like it used to be we had a lot slower cycles, and uh like stuff like rake and planning around like buffing rake and stuff was more important. But as the rotation is now, where you can just afford to just waste them freely because finishers do like all the damage, it is really not as interesting as it used to be. Because before, it used to be that rake was a significant chunk of your it's still, by the way, I should say, still a significant chunk overall, but it used to be a very significant part of the rotation was maximizing how much damage you get from rake, and that meant that you wanted to refresh it efficiently and stuff like this. And when that went away, because you're going through 3 cycles or something but on live between each rake refresh, it's really trivial to maintain fully buffed rake. And that was like all the gameplay was basically, because you have it for every finish anyway.
Yeah,
Just pressing an extra button at the same point every time, which is not that good gameplay. Like, it's fine, but it's not that good.
yeah,
Like, it's not like amazing.
yes. So this essentially is very similar to live in that it's just one extra button you press every
Yeah.
X cycles. Um, so that's I think those are the actual changes to Feral itself, to the core spec. Um, but we've also had legendaries, we've had covenants since not covenants, we've had covenants since the first one. That we can talk about covenants a bit later, and conduits, which are the soulbind gems slash essences that you're going to socket into your tree, and will give you powers and will rank up. So we might as well start with the legendaries because the legendaries are probably more interesting. So there's 4 general legendaries, which any druid spec can get, and that we can get, that are available, and there's 4 feral specific legendaries, which only affect feral abilities. Because of how dot damage is distributed between Feral and Moonkin, so Moonkin does a lot less dot damage than Feral does. Two of these legendaries actually, two of the general legendaries, I should say, feel very Feral specific, which is quite nice. So it's almost like we have 6 legendaries. So you might as look at those 2 general legendaries first, um, and they both affect similar things. So Drought of Deep Focus is obviously the single target only legendary. So it's when Moonfire, Rake, Rip, or Rejuvenation are on a single target, their effects are increased 30%. Because I've seen some confusion about this, this just means that you need to have each of those abilities on a single target, not to have all of them on a single target to get the bonus.
Yeah. You do not need to re-give the boss.
Cheeky mind control. But yeah, I mean it's single target only. It's a pretty boring legendary, but
It also works. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's interesting. I don't think it's particularly good either, but it's okay. It's not. I imagine it's probably gonna be. Uh, Piercing a target is probably gonna be fine tuned because it's not that hard to tune.
yes,
It's obviously slightly better for ally builds,
slightly
but
better for
I
ally
think.
builds. Yes, and completely useless
Well,
for
I
balance.
actually significantly better for ally builds, yeah, but I'm not sure it's enough to. Basically, it may not be good enough to make ally better than alternatives. We will depend on tuning, obviously, all of that, but it will be better in that scenario. So I guess that's the niche. I do think the next one we're gonna get to is just more interesting, but
Yes, okay, so we jump onto that. So it's Circle of Life and Death. It's your damage over time effects deal the damage in 25% less time, and your healing over time effects occur in 15% less time. So I'm sure everyone will remember Jagged Wounds. This is essentially Jagged Wounds in legendary form.
yeah. So this means that you need to what reducing the time it takes mean is that the dot will simply have a lower max duration but do the same amount of ticks. So you're not losing any damage by it being shorter, but it means that you have to cast it more often. And that goes for all your dots, I think. So that would affect
Yes, it
Moonfire as
does.
well, obviously.
Yep,
Yeah.
and Thrash. Yep, it's
Uh,
everything.
and I mean, 25% less time or 30% damage is almost the same number because the dots are usually very energy efficient to cast, so they are more efficient than the alternatives anyway. So casting them more often is something you want to. I say generally, if they're not worth casting, so they are basically always more energy efficient than whatever else you could be doing. So um, this is gonna end up being, I think, on single target as good or stronger than the previous round one that just increased damage by 30%, except this one will also work on AoE, and so I think this one is just almost at least strictly better than the Drought of Deep
Yes.
Focus.
Any
So
Primal Wraths in the chat?
yeah,
Yeah, I've actually played with this one quite a lot, and with the new Sabertooth, which I guess we haven't actually talked about new Sabertooth because
that's true. We can do that
it's like
next.
yeah, the new Sabertooth is essentially the old Sabertooth except it's 5 seconds instead of infinite that it is on live. It's not actually infinite, but I can't remember the number.
It's 4 seconds per combo point, I think, and it's
Yeah,
1 second on.
God, that's
Because
so
for some
much.
reason they decided it used to be 5 seconds per combo point, but they decided they were gonna nerf Sabertooth by reducing it by 1 second. Like that doesn't make any sense. Anyway,
Yes.
so it's 1 second per combo point now.
Yes, so you will drop Rip off. So essentially, what it does is it makes Rip into kind of like a void form. So you'll need to balance: do I refresh my Rip now within Tiger's Fury, or do I sneak in another Ferocious Bite and then refresh Rip outside of Tiger's Fury? So there's actually some really interesting gameplay there in
Yeah,
terms of playing it. And this legendary
it's
just
infinitely better than
turns
all
it
that.
up a little
Like
bit.
it's still. I think I personally still don't like this design space, but like it, this version of the talent is at least not stupidly busted. Like so,
Yes.
there's that.
Yeah. And this legendary, when you're playing it, Sabertooth and this legendary, is actually a little bit frantic. And it kind of feels very Emerald Nightmarish in terms of
That's cool.
squeezing in bites, which is cool. I've enjoyed playing with it. Hopefully, it ends up reasonably solid. because I think based on sort of just eye looks, I think this is probably one of the better ones to get early because it will work in Mythic Plus, it will work on single target, it will work all over the place.
Multi-dotting and stuff as well.
Yeah,
Like it's just better.
yeah. Um,
I really like this. I think this is a really good design space as well, and I think this really shows you when you play with something like this, you really feel how much like small pacing changes matter for this spec, and why the reason it feels so stale on live is
oh
a
god,
lot just
yes,
because of the duration of the dots. Like
yes,
shortening the dots would make the levitation more interesting as well. It's just yeah,
yeah. There's
and
just
it really
large
highlights why
periods.
live Sabertooth is so bad
Yeah,
as well. Actually,
because there's just large periods where you don't care about pressing any other button except tread,
yeah.
um, which is just very stale. And yes, this really does drive home how much better it could play. And fortunately, it does play a little bit better when you play with this legendary. Even without this legendary, it plays a bit better. But in general, it just plays a bit better. So Lycara's Fleeting Glimpse is the next one. So every 45 seconds while in combat, you cast a spell based on your form. So this is Wild Growth, Primal Wrath, Barkskin, Starfall, or Stampeding Roar. Um,
I mean, this is so bad. I'm like, I'm not sure what the idea of this is, but like uncontrollably casting spells. So let me put it like this: I don't know the numbers here exactly, right? This is subject to tuning. So if you imagine that you're, and obviously you can track this because it is 45 seconds on
yeah,
the dot. So if you are like, for example, a Resto Druid, maybe just a free Wild Growth is really good because obviously that's a valuable spell in most cases, right? Except this is damage going out. But like getting a Primal Wrath randomly cast every 45 seconds is completely garbage. Like
yep.
it will replace your rip on single target. That might be snapshot. That's bad, by the way. Just
And it will be a shorter
bad.
duration rip.
Yeah, and it will replace any snapshots. So you better have a Blood Talons up for the timing as well. And if you have that right, or TF, whatever. And it's just not a lot of damage. Like you cast Primal Wrath a lot, so it's like,
Yep.
what is this for? I
Yes.
mean, I guess it could be situationally useful for Starfall or for
Yes.
Barkskin or whatever,
That
but
was my
it's like,
first thought. My first thought was we don't want this for Primal Wrath. We want this for Starfall, if anything.
I mean, yeah, I mean, it's probably pretty good for. I assume that this spell doesn't put the real version of spell on cooldown
It does
in the case
not.
of Barkskin or Stampeding Roar. Yeah, so I mean, 45 seconds for like Stampeding Roar every 45 seconds is not bad. I mean, it's situational, obviously, very situational, but it's not bad. And same with like a free Barkskin every
Yeah.
15,
It's
45
probably
seconds is
decent for
also
bet,
good,
yeah.
right? Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think it's fine. And so if you need that survivability, like you could maybe use this, but it is pure utility. You should not consider this ever for damage because
Yeah.
it's gonna be bad. Like it's just strictly worse than anything else that affects Primal Rough. Like
Yeah. Yes, opportunity cost of the proc is something that a lot of people don't consider. So I had a lot of people talk about how maybe because Convoke the Spirits casts Moonfire, that will make Lunar Inspiration better because
wait,
you get Lunar Inspiration Moonfire from Convoke. But obviously, because you maintain the Lunar Inspiration dot anyway, all you're really getting from that is the Moonfire direct damage. And it's the same with this. The opportunity cost of getting a Primal Wrath is just a bit whatever because you're casting Primal Wrath already. So all you really get is the direct
yeah,
damage.
yeah, exactly. Like it's not gonna be, it's very little damage. Like a Primal Rough cast per 45 seconds. Like yeah, sure, if this adds up at that time and you can play around it, sure, it's not terrible, but it isn't ever gonna be good. And the thing is, when you compare it to the alternatives, you could just have all of those rips you apply anyway, like tick 25% faster. So it's gonna be strictly better, I think.
Yeah,
Like I for damage, this is bad. This is just bad. I
yeah,
mean, you could argue the utility value of having you can just basically get to pick between Roar, Barkskin, and Wild Growth every 45 seconds is fine. And I mean, if Starfall is gonna keep being busted, you know, but eh, this is
we'll
just
have to
not
see.
very
Yeah,
impressive. This is just not very impressive.
yeah,
I imagine this is useless almost in practice,
yeah.
unfortunately.
I'd probably go as far to say that. Yeah,
Except for Guardian, by the way. I think it's
I
probably
think it's
useful to
busted
the
for
full.
Guardian.
Yeah.
It's what 50% uptime on Barkskin. That feels really
Yeah,
insane.
yeah, yeah. That seems really good. Yeah.
Next one, Oath of the Elder Druid. So this is Echo Wraith. So it's effects of Thick Hide, Astral Influence, Feline Swiftness, and Ysera's Gift increased by 75%. And when you shift into your Affinities form, you gain Heart of the Wild for 10 seconds once every 1 minute. Um, this is probably really busted for Resto and Guardian, but
Yeah.
If we want Heart of the Wild every 1 minute, then this is probably good for us. But I'm very concerned about Feral if we want Heart of the Wild for 10 seconds every minute. um,
I really, yeah. Well, the reason we would want that then would be literally because we want to use balance spells because they would be overpowered somehow, and that
sure.
is bad space to be. Let's just say that.
Yes, like potentially, maybe we really want the extra what, like 2 yards from Astral Influence. But
Heart of the Wild Convoke for some insane Starfall deck.
I mean,
Mhm.
yes.
Mhm.
But again, if we want Heart of the Wild Convoke every 1 minute, then I'm really concerned about Feral. Like, don't get me wrong, balance. I'm pretty sure that we will be like balance convoking on AOE. But if we're Heart of the Wild convoking every single one instead of having
Mhm.
25% faster ticking dots or whatever the other feral legendaries do, then there's some tuning issues going on within the spec. Uh,
Yep.
so I think this is another one that's probably pretty useless for DPS. It's probably pretty good for Baron Resto. We'll see where that goes for them. Um, that's all of the general legendaries. That's what everyone else has. But we also have obviously feral specific legendaries we mentioned earlier, so we can go through those. They're almost all they're almost exclusively all old set bonuses, which is fair enough. So the first one, which should be fresh in everyone's mind, is Apex Predator's Craving, which from the name you should remember from Antorus. Rip damage has a 4% chance to make your next ferocious bite free and deal the maximum damage.
Yep. Not a lot to say there, more than the fact that when this existed, Primal Draft did not exist. So
Yes, obviously, so a few things have changed since this existed. So when this did exist, if I recall correctly, it was somewhere in the realms of 2 to 3% damage, um, and it wasn't a
yeah,
particularly good set bonus.
and it's worth saying that at this time as well, we had
Jagged Wounds.
Ashlamane's. No, 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 but
Oh, Ashmane's Rip.
Ashlamane's. Yeah, exactly. So we got extra tick from that, and the two set bonus also had a chance, like 10% chance to duplicate ticks. So we had a
Yeah,
lot more rip ticks than on live single target.
but also when we had this, we also didn't have Mastery affecting Ferocious Bite and Sabertooth.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah, of course, bite is way stronger than it was before.
yes,
Like way stronger.
Bite is a much
And
better ability.
and like I said, with the fact that Primal Wrath
Yes.
is exists now as well, that's the big thing.
Yeah.
So like on multi-dotting with this now, you're gonna get a lot of these procs, which you're gonna be able to funnel into one target.
Yeah. If you were doing Zul, this legendary is probably fucking insane. Um,
Well, except that you would kill all the ads and your
yeah,
rogues
well,
would be one
fuck
hit.
sub rogues. They don't exist anymore.
True.
If we're
Yeah,
doing
I mean
Shadowlands Zul.
that's what every mage and warlock told you anyway, so I guess it's the same.
Um, but yeah, I think this is probably. I think it's probably going to be okay on single target. And if you can then Primal Wrath things and funnel, I think it's probably going to be reasonably insane, like Vexiona or Hive Mind or something. Or hell, even Azoth, I think this had the potential to be sort of reasonably insane.
Yep.
Um, so that's pretty cool. You
It's
probably end
worth
up.
keeping track of this if we eventually get to combine two legendaries at the same time. Like
Yes.
this, something like this could scale really well as well with Circle of Life and Death,
Yes.
for example.
Yeah, if we ever get to have two legendaries, then I think it is highly likely that this is one of the legendaries that you would use. It might not end up being the best legendary full stop, um, for when we
But
go live with
situational at
Shadowlands,
least, yeah.
but I definitely think this is one that we should keep an eye on. Um, and who doesn't like getting little procs? I quite like procs. They just make the
Mm.
rotation feel a bit
I, I
fresher.
I like bite. I like biting a lot, like big bites, yeah, all day long.
Yeah,
More bites, please.
I love big fight. Yeah, bring back old Sabertooth. I didn't say that. Okay, so the next legendary is
Like, wait, just quickly to add,
okay, yeah.
this would just be. I wish. I know I'm the only one in the world that likes Iron Yos, but like, I just want to point out that this would be strictly better if it's MAME. Just throwing it out there. Anyway, let's move on.
I really like Iron Jaws. To be fair, I don't hate Iron Jaws. I think it's a pretty cool ability. Right, so this is a combination of Chatoyant Signant and the HFC set bonus called Cat Eye Curio. And its clear cast
Cringe.
abilities Clear cast
Yeah.
abilities generate 25% of their energy cost, and your maximum energy is increased by 60%. Um, yeah, we have a higher energy pool. I really like having a higher energy pool. Um, I could probably do without the clear cast abilities generate 25% of their energy cost, but
Yeah, this is just a throwback to the HFC set bonus that gave you this. Like, it gave you the entire back then, not just 25%,
yes,
but obviously it was at a much lower mock omen proc chance, and it was a different spec as well. Yeah.
yes, no, yeah, there was a variety of other things going on with that.
But it had the problem back then that it just made energy trivial. But I mean, we're used to that, I guess. I think this is fine. I mean, it maximum energy pool is very important when we're talking about procs like this because it's very easy to overflow when you if you have a pool at all. So increasing the pool allows you to actually have some pooling space, which is relevant. Like when you're waiting for a boss, something it's actually a strength to be able to pull without losing a lot of damage overall. So I don't mind this, but I don't think it's very interesting to play with. But we'll see. I
It's
could be wrong.
not
Like
very
energy pool
interesting
is
to play
nice, but
against. It feels decent to play with in Mythic Plus. I think
yeah,
it will
I
probably end
couldn't
up
mind
being
enough.
fine, um, especially with one of the
And obviously,
conduits that we're going on later.
yeah, and obviously this is one of those things that basically, if it doesn't strictly mandate, but it would basically only make sense to play this with mock, I think, because the interaction there is that you get 50% more procs from Omen anyway, so
Yep,
this buffs up the effect a lot.
yep. This certainly
So
has some
yeah,
interaction with Mock.
like
But it's
basically, if this is not best with mock, then realistically this is so overpowered that it would be the best legendary, you know. So that's the thing. Like either this would be interaction with mock will be important, or this will just be super overpowered. That's
yeah,
like the two tuning point.
yes. I think that's probably likely. But it's not hugely interesting. I'd much rather we just get base 200 energy as default.
Same, yeah.
Because I think that's the sort of the interesting play part of that legendary as opposed to the
Mm-hmm.
what's probably the greatest strength part of that legendary, which is the clear cast abilities generating 25% of their energy cost. Um, so yeah, so that is a legendary. So we've got Eye of Fearful Symmetry. This one's a bit more interesting. So this is Tiger's Fury causes your next finishing moves to restore 3 combo points, and that's the Siege of Orgrimmar set bonus. Um, in Mythic Plus, this one actually plays really interesting with Predator, and actually makes Predator plus Berserk a reasonably effective cooldown
Yeah,
because you end up just chaining Primal Wrath, Primal Wrath, Primal Wrath, or in fact, Primal Wrath, bite, 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 Primal Wrath.
yeah.
Um, so that's pretty cool. Um,
I think this is cool. Like I really like. I mean, obviously there's many sources now of combo points more than there is on live. So there's always an argument that uh you might end up with like, oh, you have overflowing combo points, but overflowing on combo points is a lot more interesting to play with than overflowing on energy because it doesn't feel like if you get a lot of combo points, you know you get to use a lot of finishes. That's still decision making involved in that. Whereas with energy, it's just like, oh, I can't do anything differently. So
yes, I just press my buttons a bit more.
yeah,
Um, yeah, no, I agree. I like getting combo points. I would be much like how the previous legendary gives us more maximum energy, so we could make use of the procs and the energy refund that it gives us. I think this would be interesting if it gave us overflow combo points, much like the old rogue talent.
anticipation. Yeah,
Anticipation, yeah. Um, so I think that would be an interesting addition to this. But I think this plays pretty well actually. I don't think it's likely to be particularly good on single target,
no,
but
it shouldn't be. You get two extra. You get the 2 extra bytes per minute. Doesn't seem
yeah,
2 extra. Sorry, one free byte per minute. That seems fine, but not like any super amazing.
yeah. But I don't think this is targeted at single target. I think this is a
No,
Mythic Plus
yeah,
slash AoE targeted legendary. So I'm okay with it not being particularly good in single targets. This probably won't be one you get early, but it might be one that once you're finished with progress and you're ready to push Mythic Plus, that we start eyeing up potentially. Yep. So the
And
next one,
this
oh sorry,
and
go on.
yeah, no, obviously there are also situational bosses, where there's a lot of adds dying where this could be really strong with
Yep.
Predator, right? So for
Yes.
example, bosses like, I know this is an old example, but Sul in Hellfire Citadel is a perfect example of a boss where this works really well. Where like you have random add dying more or
Yes.
less consistently spread out, so you just will get super high leverage from this. So
Yeah. Anything which
it's
has little
situationally really
shit that
strong.
you can tag. Um,
Yeah.
or like in Mythic Plus this season, the Trog boss in Junkyard, where there's a load of stuff dying constantly that you can just reset Predator on,
Yeah.
and just chain that way. So yeah, much like the this is going to look a little bit weird for anyone who's missing, but the recording software failed halfway talking through one of our legendaries, so we're going to pick up from the point where I left off, and these two things will be stitched together. So we just finished talking about Eye of Fearful Symmetry, which is the Tiger's Fury causes your next finishing move to restore 3 combo points. And the next legendary, which is going to feel very weird for me and Zan now, so bear with us a little bit, because we just spent the last 5 minutes or so talking about this legendary, and now we have to talk about it all over again. So the next legendary is Frenzy Band, which is combo point generating abilities reduce the cooldown of Incarnation King of the Jungle or Berserk by 0.2 seconds. And during Incarnation King of the Jungle or Berserk, they cause the target to bleed for an additional 50% of the damage over 8 seconds. Do you want to go on with what you were saying, Zan?
Yeah, so like this is basically reminiscent of an Azerite trait, Unbound Ferocity on live, and it is also the um, Blackrock Foundry for set bonus, kind of,
Yes.
except it doesn't affect finishers, which was the interesting bit of that set bonus.
Yeah.
Um, the thing with this is that Berserk is better, so it's slightly interesting, but it is still weak. Like you get maybe, I'm just doing some very quick napkin math here, so this could be off, but like maybe you get 20 seconds per cooldown off. So like if you're using it on cooldown, which you should be,
Probably sounds about right.
so you get maybe 20 seconds off. So it becomes a 2 minute 40 instead of 3 minutes, which you also have to delay TF a bit to sync up into that, which isn't great. And also it seems like that is a bit too little for this to make a lot of sense as a for the CDR. And the damage part is just probably not interesting enough at all.
Yes.
Um,
So we were
because
saying
it is
that
only on shred.
Berserk has the shred value for shred now, and obviously the rake impact damage is still somewhat relevant, even if it isn't a huge part of it. But because new Berserk also encourages you to cast more finishers, those two things probably
Yeah.
counteract each other.
Yeah, it does 60% more damage and also gets the crit, so it's roughly double damage compared to a shred outside of Berserk, but you cost half as many, right? Compared to old Berserk. So the damage bit is not very strong, like frankly, and I do think it would be a lot more interesting if they actually made it affect finishes in some way. I understand that 50% finisher damage would be very high, so that wouldn't work. But the
Need
damage
to
part of it
tune
isn't
somewhat,
interesting on its
yes.
own. Yeah, and the combo point CDR is not interesting if it's this week because you don't feel the 20 seconds
Yes.
because of what I said. And
And
like
yeah,
all these CDR mechanics, a lot of it comes down to whether you get an extra use or not. And 20 seconds will rarely mean that you end up with an extra use. And if you
yeah, it
don't
would have
get
to be
an
a
extra
weird
use,
timed
or
fight.
yeah, exactly, it would have to be
It'd
very
have to be quite
precisely, and
precise, yeah.
obviously yeah, and sure, it could be really powerful if that happens. Like you're in the situation where this would make you get an extra use, but it's gonna be very situational at best, I think, and it's not interesting, right? If it significantly increased how many circs you get to cast, it's a different story, right? Like maybe this would be more interesting if it was just Vision of Perfection, like proc, so it has a random chance of giving you some berserk time or something. Like there are many ways to do a berserk legendary, I think, with the new berserk, but this is
Yeah.
unfortunately the very
Something
boring
more
way
like
to do it.
Arcanic Pulsar or something that the Boomkins have, where when
Yeah,
you
yeah,
spend X amount of resources, you get a Berserk rock. Um, yeah, I agree. This is my least favorite legendary. I think it's one of the least interesting legendaries. I don't think it has a huge impact on how you play. Whereas I think the others noticeably change how you play. Um, Even the
Yeah,
general legendaries,
with the exception of
30%. Yeah,
the 30% damage. Yeah.
yes, that's the only other one that sort of doesn't really do anything. But I think that probably ends up being stronger than this.
If not, I would be very surprised. Let's just say that.
Yes, yeah. Um, so yeah, so most of our legendaries look pretty interesting, which I was reasonably happy about. And
I
they
would say the
play
first
pretty well.
glance they look better than what the Legion ones did when we saw them the first time.
Yes. Oh
So
yeah, for
yeah,
sure. Yes, I would definitely agree with that. Um, yeah. Right. So conduits. Um, explain what conduits were before, but essentially you will socket these into specific slots on your soulbind tree, which is like a kind of talent tree kind of thing that you get from the covenant you're pledged with. You get a choice of three, and you can use three potency conduits. So potency is sort of the DPS increase conduits. There's also endurance and finesse conduits, but they're utility and defensive. So we'll probably focus here on the potency conduits. And again, there's some reasonably interesting ones. The first one, which used to be called Potency Conduit 1 and is now called Carnivorous Instinct, is Tiger's Fury damage bonus is increased by 3%, and this scales up to 7.2%.
and it is obviously 15% baseline,
Yeah,
so it would take it to 25, 22% or something.
yes. I think this is reasonably cool. It has an impact on how much we care about snapshotting TF.
Yeah,
Um, it's not
and
hugely interesting, but yeah, go on.
it also makes it more important to try and fit bites into TF windows, like actually pulling before, well, pulling combo points, yeah, before
Yes.
TF, and try to like save BRS and stuff like this to maximize how much damage you can press into the TF window, which is good. Like that's cool.
Yeah,
Um,
potentially has some synergy with the Tiger's Fury legendary from before.
in some ways, this is a continuation of Younger Fury. Obviously, it doesn't give you crit, but it is a similar idea that it buffs up the TF window.
Yeah. I don't think it giving us pure damage is necessarily the most interesting versus Jungle Fury,
No,
but there is some gameplay here, which is cool enough. It'll be interesting to see how that works out. The next conduit is Incessant Hunter. And that's Rip has a 10% chance to grant 3 energy. So again, when this existed in the past, in the state of the Blackrock Foundry 2 set, and I believe the Tomb of Sargeras 2-piece, um,
yeah,
we didn't have Primal Wrath. And now we do have Primal Wrath. um,
yep.
so anything that Rip proc related is a lot better nowadays when you can press Primal Wrath, because it turns out more Rips are better than one Rip.
And we can also have Jagged Wounds. Not
Yes.
Ashmaid's Rape, unfortunately, but we can have Jagged Wounds. So, it'll
Yes.
take that. It takes those.
I don't care hugely about more energy. I guess I don't.
No. But trickling energy like this is less bad than big chunky
Yes,
energy,
yes, because you
so
can actually
it's
spend
not too
it,
bad.
and it feels
Yeah.
more sort of a natural flow. Um, 10% damage on single target. Again, sorry, I should have mentioned this starts at 10% and it scales up to 24%. 24% is a
Yeah.
much larger number than 10%. Um, at higher ranks, it's probably not bad on single target, but again, not hugely interesting. Could be worse. We have stuff that seems more interesting that we'll get into later. Um, so the next one, which is probably one of the more interesting ones, is finishing moves have a 3% chance per combo point spent to make your next rake or shred deal damage as though you were stealthed. Um, this starts at 3% and goes up to 7.2%. So that'll be what,
Per combo point,
per combo
3%.
point, yes. Um, so 7.2%, that's 35% chance proc. 36. Um,
36.
which I think is probably high enough to make it interesting.
Yep. I think so too. That means that you get it's not quite, but it is close to getting a stealth proc for every third
Yeah,
well, every 30 seconds roughly, I think. Or slightly faster. So it is pretty I think it's cool. It's off the play around, something you need to think about because you could easily spend it on shred by mistake. Which
Yeah.
I mean, to be fair, wouldn't be the worst
Eventually,
now, but still,
sometimes shred is the
it's
correct decision.
yeah,
If
yeah, for
you're
sure. If you don't need to refresh the rake for sure.
Yeah. So some notes about this. This stacks and it's not consumed when you're in Berserk, um, which is nice quality of life and actually makes it
Mm.
pretty interesting. So you can come out of Berserk with sort of 3, 4 stacks of it, and you'll be able to keep your rake. You'll be able to shred. It'll essentially be sort of continuing your Berserk uptime a little bit.
Yep.
Um, it,
And you almost for sure gonna have two of them with how many finishes you will end up casting
yes,
in
yeah.
Berserk, by the way.
I think this is the I think some people might complain about this being RNG, but I think this is the kind of RNG which is actually good. It's not like
Yeah.
Infinite Stars is proccing and just doing damage. It's I'm getting a proc which I can then choose how to use to maximize damage.
Yeah.
Um, so
It's also
yeah,
it's not gonna be that inconsistent when the proc rate is high, right?
yes,
It's not like this. Oh, rarely I get the sick combo. Like you're gonna have streaks of this. Like
yeah, it's a high enough proc chance that it will feel like you're getting them fairly reasonably, without feeling like you just have permanent uptime on Stealth Rake and you never have to make a decision. Um, I think this is probably the best design conduit we have, um, and I'm very much looking forward to playing it. It seems very interesting.
you
Um,
don't like Taste of Blood now.
Taste of Blood is pretty good as well. I do like Taste of Blood. So we'll move on to that one then. Taste of Blood is Ferocious Bite deals 3% increased damage for each of your bleeds on the target, scaling from 3% to 7.2%. So my I really like this, right? Because I like having to maximize my bleeds on something in order to burst it. This also brings Thresh into the rotation.
Yeah.
Um,
Which probably um, Blood Talons already do
yes,
realistically, but
that was
this
what I was going to say. Yeah.
definitely,
So
yeah,
yeah, the interesting part of it bringing Thresh into rotation would be that you don't normally press Thresh, and now you do press Thresh. The fact that we probably already pressed Thresh um, makes it a little bit less interesting, but
well, hey, maybe Fair Frenzy is best. Who knows?
and yeah, maybe Feral Frenzy ends up being pretty good. In that case, it makes it even more interesting because Feral Frenzy bite bursts.
Fair
Yeah,
Frenzy is a blade indeed, and
it is indeed
also
bleed.
the Frenzy band is also a blade. Just throwing it out there.
I hadn't thought about that. That
Yeah.
is a very valid point. God, I hope this doesn't make Frenzy Band good. I really hope that's the case. Fuck. But yeah, I think this is pretty interesting. I don't think it's as interesting as Sudden Ambush, but I quite like this.
Yeah,
Um,
I think it's fine. Yeah.
yes. So we also have some other conduits which I haven't put on a notes sheet because I have a very small IQ. So there's a covenant specific conduit for each of the different covenants and for each of the different covenant abilities it gives you. So there's Venthyr, which gives you stacking crit for every ability you use. So the Venthyr covenant ability is obviously Ravenous Frenzy. Every time you use an ability, you get stacking haste damage. Um, haste and damage? I think it's just haste and
Healing
damage.
done, I think as well, but yeah.
Healing done, yeah, which is just damage for healers.
Mm.
So the Venthyr Covenant gives you crit in addition to that damage and haste, which obviously, considering we're feral, and crit gives us more resources at a more feeling, more noticeable rate than. God, I'm struggling with English today. At a more noticeable rate than haste does. That's pretty good for us.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's probably mandatory for Venture Covenant to have a chance of being good. For us, because no, I'm not saying it's bad. I just want to say that, and obviously it's going to depend on tuning, like everything. But um, the Venture Covenant giving haste, like stacking haste like that, is very hard for us to actually get a lot of value from. Damage is fine, but obviously over time damage doesn't really benefit when it falls off, you know. So I think the crit is significant because it means you're gonna get significantly more bites, and the bites gonna do more damage. So that matters a lot for Ventur. I think if you are using Ventur, this conduit's probably gonna be mandatory. I think, realistically speaking.
Yeah,
Now, don't know whether you're gonna use Ventur, but you know.
that remains to be seen. Yes. Yeah, I think the amount of crit it gives you. So I think if remember we looked at it, it was you crit capped at around 14 stacks. Um,
Yeah,
the amount of crit it gives you makes it pretty interesting because you'll be guaranteed in Berserk to be going shred bite, shred bite, shred bite
yeah.
at 5 common points. So that's pretty good.
And you get the haste to definitely fill logos as
Yes,
well.
yep, even more energy. The Kyrian Covenant ability is obviously Kindred Spirits. It's exceedingly complicated and very confusing, but essentially what it does is you and a friend share 30% damage, um, so they will deal 30% more of your damage, and you will deal 30% more of their damage. Um, the,
For 10
for
seconds
10
every
seconds every
minute.
1 minute, yes. So the Covenant conduit for them is it reduces the cooldown of the Kyrian ability. I think down to 45 seconds, 44 seconds.
Sounds about right.
Kyrian ability is really boring, so pressing Kyrian ability more is not particularly interesting.
Also, it's just bad, I think. So the difference here is that at a minute cooldown, the damage you do will always sync up with your damage window with Haggis Fury, which, like, I'm afraid to say it, but I think Kyrian is very likely to be good numerically. Like, I'm just gonna like to tell
Yes.
everyone that this is very likely to actually be numerically good. But um, desyncing the cooldown from TF is actively bad for us, I think, because our damage is going to be very heavily focused around that. And like we have talked about, a lot of these things already affect your TF and Berserk damage windows. And desyncing this is probably actively pretty bad. So I think this conduit is probably likely to be bad, even with Kyrian, obviously.
Yep.
Kyrian might be the best without this because the other conduits might just be better.
It also will probably desync it from anyone else's cooldowns. So if you're potentially
Yes.
syncing with a rogue and they're dancing every 1 minute, suddenly it's not synced with that. The fire mage isn't combusting every 2 minutes.
Yeah.
So yes, so I think that's likely not ideal. Um, the Night Fae Covenant ability, obviously, convoke the spirits, cast 16 abilities within 4 seconds. So the Covenant conduit for that is scaling just damage increase while you're channeling. So it's essentially just your convoke the spirits does more damage. It wasn't whitelisted for druid abilities. It is now whitelisted for druid abilities.
Oh.
Um, it's not hugely interesting. It's just your convoke does more damage, but it will probably end up being fairly good, I think. Um,
Yeah.
there's just not a
Seems
whole
fine.
lot to talk
Like it's
about
a
it.
significant damage increase, right? And you do get a bunch of bites in that window. Like I'd be surprised if it was bad. Let's just put it like that.
And I don't know what the Necrolord Covenant ability, Covenant Conduit is because I don't care about Necrolord.
I
But
should probably find out, but I'd imagine
give me
it's
a
something
second. I
really
think it's your
boring.
dot
With
do more damage, but let me confirm that. Necrolord. Yep, yep. That's the wrong spec.
I'm sorry to anyone who is a big Necrolord fan, but like this conduit ability is so boring. It's insane,
Yes.
actually.
Yeah. So yes, it's your periodic abilities. Adaptive Swarm increases periodic abilities by an additional 6%, scaling up to 14%. So again, it's not particularly interesting. It probably doesn't change how you play Evolved Swarm. It's just you do a bit more damage during it. Um, probably still doesn't end up very good. Um, probably still
Um,
ends up pretty boring. The core problem with
yeah, I
Adaptive Swarm
mean,
is that it's pure single target, and this doesn't help that.
yeah,
If
yeah. I mean,
say, yeah,
it doesn't have to be pure single target, right? Because it will jump around. So if we imagine it's a very, very long
well
AoE
you'll
fight,
have it on 2 targets at once at most.
yeah, exactly, because it jumps a friend between. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I don't know. It's yeah, I don't know. It's pretty weak, I think, and like they could buff this to be insanely strong by just increasing
Oh
the
god, yeah.
damage,
It
but it's
it
like
could just be tuned into the stratosphere. Um,
It's like 25. It's a 25-second cooldown that you cast don't really care about, and it will just do damage, and it's like,
the only time you
whatever.
care about it is on the opener, where you precast it on yourself at 11 seconds.
We love those 11-second cool timers.
that is the only time you care about it. After that, you just cast it on cooldown.
At
Um,
least it's not 25 seconds. What can I say?
at least it's not 25 seconds. Yeah, so Necrolord, not particularly interesting. Necrolord Covenant Conduit, also not particularly interesting. Right. So that's all of the conduits we've talked about. We've talked about the legendaries and we've talked about the changes. What do we think the issues are now with Feral? Or what would we like to change? I mean, within the realm of
uh,
reason, right? Because what would we like to change could go very different places here.
yeah, yeah.
What do we think is
Uh,
reasonable to change?
yeah. So what is reasonable? Well, I still think that Heart of the Wild should be baseline because it's actually just stupid that. And especially if, like we talked about before, it end up actually being something we would use for throughput in any circumstance. The fact that it is just taking and utility row slot is stupid. But
Yes,
minor pet peeve of mine is that if this is ever useful for throughput for us, then it's like
mandatory.
this is pretty annoying.
And I think
And
with
it
what
just
I've
removes
played
the
so far,
difference.
where Moonkin Convoke is legitimately something that I think we will probably end up doing, I think it is hitting that spot of being a mandatory throughput. Um,
Yeah. I unfortunately think so too, but I will say, of course, this is assuming Night Fae and it's assuming a lot of stuff, but it very well could be, and I don't like that. Easiest solution is just baseline it. I don't think there's any good reason why it isn't
yeah.
baselined. I
Well, I
mean,
think
yeah,
it's
it's
just
power, sure, but
nonsensical that it exists dependent upon another talent. I don't think there's
yeah,
ever been a talent that works that way, where it depends on what you've taken in another row. Um, like,
no,
like I think the best example is Aura Mastery for Paladins, where it's dependent on what Aura talent they take, but Aura Mastery is baseline.
yeah.
Um,
So,
yes,
but we have talked about that before, but I do still think that's a change they
I
could just
agree.
make, and then they could, I don't know, put Ursa's Vortex or something back there, and it's fine. There's many options. Use some random CC utility, that's fine.
Yeah.
Uh,
Scent Blood,
Scent of Blood. Yes, so Scent of Blood is a talent that never ever has had a niche.
which is shit.
There was a world on life where it could have had a niche. I know people think it's always doomed to be terrible, but I mean it could just straight up have been better than Brahma Rough if it was tuned differently. But the thing with it is, it is not. So it never was. And the problem is this does exact same thing Primal Raft does on live. Now, however, on beta, because of the target cap, it's
It's
people
just
said that
worse.
its target cap means you cannot max out the reduction, but that's not true because trash isn't target cap. But the thing is, swipe just doesn't do damage. So, and the problem is with 5 targets, it now does even less damage because it only hits 5 targets, right? So there's no like magical target threshold where this becomes really good. So is Scent of Blood useless? No, but it's not strong, and it interacts poorly with Predator because you already have a lot of energy in AoE, and yeah, it tries to beat Primal Wrath at what Primal Wrath is good at. So it's like that is just a bad
Yeah.
combination of things.
I think this really
I
just needs to be changed that fits so it fits a different AoE niche as opposed to where it's just
yeah,
overlapping with Primal Wrath now. So
yeah,
be it
that's
low target
exactly.
cleave or
Yeah, there's many ways you can go with it. Like you could make a lot of changes to it. The to make it more relevant and still sort of preserve the niche it's trying to do, which is being an more or less passive AoE talent, right? That just makes swipe better. But the current design is bad. The current design space is bad. Reducing energy cost of something in the scenario where we are casting our cheapest spell, basically, and our cheapest filler certainly, while you have more energy than normal. It's just a bad design space in the first place, and then the fact that swipe is weak makes it useless in practice. So this needs to change. It doesn't do anything right now. It will never be a good choice as it currently is designed with the other constraints. So yeah, I think this is one of the biggest pet peeves because this talent is dead, like completely dead. It's not remotely situational. It's not tunable. You cannot tune this to be good without changing swipe itself, which you can do. But if you do that, a lot of other things get better and worse as well. Uh, and Trash, like the fact that it lasts 6 seconds as well, is just ugly because it means you clip trash, which is a weak
You already don't
dot
want to
in the
press
first
thrash
place.
much to start with.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It's just it's awkward. It feels bad. So yeah, that's a big thing. I think this should need to change, and
Yes.
I think it has a chance of changing. But
Thrash and Swiper are just. I think there's a lot of space. So in the past, they've never wanted to buff them because they don't want it to overthrow Shred. Um,
yeah,
but we have so much stuff bringing Thrash into the rotation regardless that I don't think it matters if Thresh does overlap with Shred because it feels like we're being pushed in that direction regardless.
yeah,
And then
and
Swipe
I
is
also
kept down
just
as
think
well because of Thresh.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Because if Swipe is stronger than Trash, you will never cast Trash. Like I think if you wanna do the laziest way to make this talent not bad, is like, oh, whenever Swipe hits a target affected by Trash, it deals whatever percent more damage, right? That's the easiest way to just make it semi-useful on some target counts. But anything, right, will make this talent better. So I think this is just this currently needs to change. Like what it changes to, I don't care, but this is a dead talent,
Yeah,
so that's bad.
yes. Dead talents,
And
no
that is
bueno.
because Trash sucks, right? That and Trash needs to not suck as well. Like that would be nice, you know.
Yes, I do think the core issue with this problem is it all goes up to sort of Thrash not being a very good spell, and then the sort of problems cascade down.
Yeah, and
Um,
also the fact that energy is just not good reward. Like it's hard to tune energy gains for Feral without either being overbearing or useless. So it's very hard to tune that, and I think it's a lot easier to tune if they actually have some damage number on it.
yes, essentially the same thing they did with Sabretooth eventually, where they just stuck at
Yeah.
20%. Um, yep. Berserk on AoE, we mentioned this a little bit. Berserk on AoE kind of doesn't do a whole lot other than potentially tab raking and shredding Primal Wrathing at high enough target
Yeah,
counts.
I actually checked that out while we were talking, and inside Berserk, Rake does at 5 targets, so that's a swipe max count. Rake does a full duration rake does more than roughly twice the damage with 30% mastery, which is not a lot. Uh, a swipe. So you will basically never not multi dot. Is the
Okay,
TLDR. Which means a swipe inside Berserk is used.
yeah,
Well, accepted if the targets live no duration whatsoever. Rake is basically just better. And so that tells you everything you need to know about swipe inside Berserk. It
yeah.
does nothing.
I think that tells you everything you need to about swipe full stop. Um,
Yeah.
okay, cool. So that's pretty good. Um, how do we feel about Brutal Slash?
So I think Brutal Slash is fine.
I think it's kind
Uh,
of obviously it's supposed to be an AOE row. I think with the
yeah.
target capping of Brutal Slash, it kind of feels like Brutal Slash is being pushed more and more towards a single target ability as opposed to the sort of the
Yeah.
burst AOE choice in that row. Um,
So I think as a single target talent, I think Brutal Slash is fine. Like it is okay to have an ability that you press, to weave into your swipe and shred. Swipe and shred. No, your shred and rake. That's fine. I don't mind that. But what I will say about it is, it doesn't do its job as a burst too very well anymore because it's too little damage on a too short cooldown. And I think if they increase the recharge back to where it used to be, like 12 or 16 seconds, but also buff the damage, then to compensate that, it would be better already because the press of the button itself would be more significant. And with the target cap, there's definitely room because he will basically never beat Primal Wrath out of his
yes,
niche anyway.
yes, I agree. I think there's a lot of things they could do with it if you had like a target
Yeah, yeah.
multiplier or something, but I do think
Oh
that
yeah,
Brutal
yeah,
Slash
and
is
of
something that
course
should be looked
that's
at.
target multiplier might be a good idea just because you don't want it to be super strong for single target. Yeah,
Yeah.
like obviously that's.
Um, I think was there anything you could think of that you have an issue with elsewise?
Uh, I mean, no, I mean, okay, we could open a big box called utility and stuff and talk about how I hate the fact that some specs have raid buffs for arbitrary reasons and others do not, and that some raid utility and Mythic Plus utility is way too good, and all of that stuff that has been fucking talked about to death, which is still true, and it's still the main issue Feral has and
Yes.
always gonna have. So obviously that's still true, but I mean I don't know if there's a lot of point to take that discussion up. Definitely, let's just to summarize that is that utility is not balanced, and I don't think Blizzard has seriously tried to balance utility. And
No, I think
That's
you can look at
actually
Demon Hunter and Mage to sort of just tell you that the fact that they have a raid buff and an immunity, and in the case of it, is Mage getting a raid cooldown back as well,
I
or a
don't
simp
know,
buff?
but
I
they
feel
have
like they got adapt.
Bloodlust.
I feel they got focus magic or something back, but that might be me being on drugs. But Demon Hunter has a raid CD, an immunity, um, and a raid buff. And Mage has an immunity and a raid buff.
Yeah.
So you can look at those two specs, then look at what some of the specs have, and you can already tell that Blizzard haven't put any thought into hmm, utility tuning.
Yeah, and like AoE and stuff like this as well. Like there's
Yep,
so many different avenues of like Feral and Druids has a lot of utility if you just count the numbers, but how useful they
impactful
are, how often
utility.
they're useful, and how impactful they are. Yeah, this is not at all. In my opinion, I don't think this is like, oh, Blizzard done a bad job. I think they have literally not tried to balance this, and I think they would do a better job if they actually tried. But I do feel like this is an issue in the game that affects most of not all specs in some way. Like either you have way too much, way too little, and some things is infinitely more useful than other things
Yep,
in practice, right? And
yes.
like having a so like I know that there's a lot of talk about, oh, but battle resets are so powerful. Yes, they are, but
You only
battle
need one.
resets is not really a druid utility. Yes, battle resets are not really druid utility, and this is the issue with talking about how powerful it is. It's very powerful, just like bloodlust slash heroism is very powerful. But the problem is it's group level, right? The group has a limited number of these, which means that it's a group decision to use them. This is not something you bring or something you use. It's not like, oh, I bring a rest. I can sacrifice my damage to like rest someone. What happens is the group needs certain amount of resources and they can spend them, right? So this is a group resource that is brought by like four specs. This isn't real utility
And
that
an
affects
engineering
them
item.
in any way. Yeah, exactly. Sure. Point is, it's very plentifully available,
Yeah,
so it doesn't really give you anything. It's not real utility brought by a spec, whereas stuff like CC or survivability and stuff like this are. So yeah.
yep, no, I agree entirely. We might as well jump to the questions now as we finish up. Um, so we had a few questions, so I picked two of them that I thought were relatively interesting. So we'll talk first thoughts on the Berserk changes impact to the value of Incarnation as a talent. Um, I think the Berserk changes are not very good for Incarnation. Obviously, Incarnation and
No.
Berserk have essentially sort of swapped places now in terms of what they bring. Um,
Yeah. So the berserk changes are objectively a buff to incarnation in the sense of I get to the caveat, but it's a buff in that it makes it stronger, right? Less like berserk is
yep,
stronger, incarnation is stronger. However, how much stronger incarnation is compared to berserk is probably going down because now you only get 10 seconds more of berserk, which is significant, and 20% energy cost reduction for those 30 seconds, which is roughly comparable then to 20% more energy. Um, that's fine, I think, in the sense of it might still be situationally useful, but I think this makes it way worse. Yeah, I think this is unlikely to be better than Soul of the Forest, for example, just because Soul of the Forest does a similar thing. Inside the Berserk, you will cut a lot of finishers, so that maximizes Soul of the Forest, and
yep,
Savage Roar works independently of this. It's fine. So Incarnation feels to be in a weird niche where it's no longer maybe even the best at increasing the power of this cooldown. That seems strange.
yes. So I do think they should look at either buffing it or changing what Berserk does. Um, it's always
Or
felt fine on that
incarnation
road,
anyway.
but yeah, it
Yeah.
should potentially be looked at.
I mean, I know, like, I know this is a wish of mine, but it would be cool if incarnation was like lower cooldown, more focused around
I
faster
agree.
berserks than it
Yes,
is about more powerful berserk.
yes, that would
That's
be
what I
much
would
more interesting.
ideally like.
It would put it in a more because that row is essentially situational resources. So
Yeah.
you've got the um, energy energy talent. You've got another talent which gives you energy and damage in a slightly different way, and then you've got incarnation, which used to give you resources in a different way via the the crit, and now gives you resources via the reduced energy cost. So I do think
Yeah.
it would be much more interesting if the resource that Incarnation as a talent gave you was more cooldowns. I
Yeah.
think that's where I would like them to go. Um,
Yeah, I
and I've
think so too.
always
But
wished
there
it
are
was sort of
many
more like
ways to go.
that.
Yeah, there are more ways to go, obviously, but the just this probably isn't good enough. I think this means that this is likely extremely situational, if ever useful. I don't know, but mm, it's fine, I guess. Yeah, they need to look at this.
Yeah,
20% sounds weak to me, right? I don't have Sims right ready, so I can't tell you for sure. Maybe I'm wrong, but it does feel like this is gonna be weak. That's the TLDR.
right. So we've talked a little bit about things we wished. So what is one more thing that you would have on your wish list for Feral going into Shadowlands?
Um, like I would wish there's a situation where you actually use lunar inspiration, which I'm afraid it might not be.
Fair enough.
Uh, Other than that, I don't know. Like shorter duration Savage Roar, I guess, because it's boring when it's like a 40-second duration.
Okay. So you'd
That's
like
probably my
Lunar
wish.
Inspiration, and you'd like yeah,
Yeah,
that's fair enough.
especially with Jagged Wounds, and then we can also uh, revert Blood Talons, and actually never mind.
Basically, you want Ian Ferrell back, is what you're saying, I think.
Sure.
Okay, cool. Right. Well, with that, I guess we'll sign off. Thanks for everyone who's listened through. I'm sorry about what is going to be a little bit of a cut in the middle, but I will do my best to seamlessly blend them together. And thanks for listening.